this first image in 005, you look up in the top right corner and you'll see a number. And these things are numbered 5, 10, 15, 20, and so forth, so that I could, reorder them without having to renumber everything. This slide really just reminds us of the context. The main context is that I had a career mission that's this father science, and I mainly learned things up in the branches when I was in academics, down in the roots when I was in industry, and that was all in service of that career mission of measurement, prediction, and control. And it had a lot of computer automation and programming in it. I haven't emphasized the computer business side of things, but that really has a major component that may come in some way. And on the right side, you see Mother Sense there. That when I went into social work, that was the transition I made from paying attention to measurement, prediction, and control to paying attention to the in-here stuff of sensation, perception, and choice, and getting to the whole question of spirituality and physicality, or if you want to say it, church and physics, or church and science. Previously, we talked about the fact that Mother Sense is eclipsed by Father Science, the inner light of wonder, the inner idea, the question of who we are, where we came from, what's this all about, the richness with which children are able to wonder about things. That's all eclipsed by our scientific culture. And the perceptions that we mentioned last time, these shift of perceptions, which seem really kind of innocent, almost mundane, the in here, out there perception, and the parts versus participants, and the idea of joining, those are very rich, but they only get filled out later as things are completed with this. They don't expose or remove the eclipse. They just start the process, and that's the way it happened for me in chronological time. Also, that shift occurred in social work, but it became aware of an eclipse, but it didn't really come up clear until much later. So that just starts the process. I showed this image last time. The main reason for showing it here is to remind that this is the undercarriage of the bridge. Remember the bridge analogy. In this work, we want to take people over the bridge from one landscape of understanding to another landscape of understanding. And this represents the undercarriage that supports the bridge. And as you can see, it's very busy. We're going to say something about that in just a minute. I will just say that for me, of course, it's really rich because this represents 15 years of my life. And part of the thing that is happening now is to get out of that mode of thinking of all this richness in the discovery of the story and take a different approach and think about the story itself and how it applies to other people and how I can help other people. So here's the first area of emotional stress. I'm just going to read that top thing to you. Parents stressed in reconciling their silent rejection of Christian dogma with the desire for their children to adopt the values fostered by our Judeo-Christian heritage, to be honest, kind, generous, confident, trustworthy, and secure. And to be blunt, and I'm hesitant to use this language, but I kind of feel like, the church has a sort of like Santa Claus, Easter Bunny thing going, where the other shoe children grow up and expect the other one to drop. Okay, you told us all that stuff and it wasn't true, and now you got these other stories that are frankly unbelievable, and so when are you going to tell us they aren't true? That's kind of harsh, but that's the way I feel. And I feel like people should recognize that that's a problem, even though parents may fully believe in the dogma. Not many, they would at least, even if they don't silently reject it, they should realize that their children would and will, because of that Santa Claus Easter Bunny syndrome. So There are really these two books on the right. There you can read these books, and you see how the church tries to reconcile science with Christian teachings. I'm just now reading the Aquinas one. That's really not a book by him. It's a book about him, and it's a pretty good book. But the church tries to reconcile science with the teachings of the church. But they still buy into what physics is saying. The story of physics, my story is that it went into the weeds, and I'm really confident in that. And this work can show that in a very clear way for people who are at least interested in geometry. And it's a very clear story even without that geometry. But those people who hear it may wonder if it's valid or not. It takes the geometry to really tie that down. And, I'm confident that lots of people can understand the geometry. It's not that hard, but it's new. So the point is that these attempts to reconcile science with Christian teachings still buy into stories from physics that are just off in the weeds as far as I'm concerned. And if they knew the real story, they would really have a basis for tying together Christian teachings with scientific discoveries without the syndrome of Santa Claus, Easter Bunny. That would be a way to convince young people to at least pay attention to the stories of the church and just let that Easter Bunny, Santa Claus stuff go by the wayside. Just ignore it because there is a foundation for the spiritual truth that's taught in the church. So, and people are also stressed, and this, is somewhat the same people, but maybe that the people who are stressed about church are also stressed about New Age kind of spirituality. So I've kind of put some images up here. I think the books by Eckhart Tolle are fabulous. The Power of Now and A New Earth, especially The Power of Now. A New Earth goes a little bit off into territory that I wouldn't exactly support. The idea of spiritual and or conscious awakening, I think those are really good ideas, but they're all sort of clothed in the New Age spirituality that people don't trust. Even meditation is just now coming into mainstream acceptance. So people feel peer and family disapproval of those teachings as cultish. And because those teachings, the way this would help with that is this gives a rigorous foundation for those teachings that is not coming from the church. It's coming from physicality. Because what happened, and this is the backstory that will be in this work, what happened was the scientific community, came up against the door of something like extrasensory reality, something like supernatural reality, not exactly those things, but they came up against a door and slammed it closed, where it could have been opened to have a unified view of the depth that all of these things are trying to help people get connected with. I've always thought that, spirituality is really, and God, it's really like water. It's not a matter of belief. It's a matter of learning how to get to it and drink it. So that's, this is still the category of that first avatar, but that's another set of attributes. In this second area of emotional stress, we switch over to people who actually have science, technology, engineering, mathematics skills. And they can be frustrated that the contemporary teachings of physics don't make sense, modern physics. They don't make sense. The interpretive stories are bizarre. The mathematics is covered only in graduate courses. It's very tough mathematics, and there's no sensible story to go with the mathematics. The stories are all about the math, actually. So relativity, space-time, the Big Bang, gravity, quantum behavior, all of those things are not comprehensible without having fluency in sophisticated mathematics. So that gives people stress, especially if they're practical minded with good, mechanical aptitude, where they're used to being able to figure things out, and where they work by analogy and they make good visual analogies in their mind. You can't do that with this work from modern physics. The books on this one show some books that I'm familiar with that where credentialed people, people with very mathematical credentials, express objections to contemporary story. The upper left one, A Scientific Adventure, the man who wrote that book, I worked with him at the University of Toronto. I used to occasionally have coffee, he would have tea, and he would talk about this work here that's in that book. And he was aligned with the book on the right, A Science at the Crossroads, was written by a guy who just had some questions about relativity and some clear, and this man is a distinguished professor, clear questions, and they would just never get answered. The reason is there weren't good answers for it. The book on the bottom, Relational Mechanics, that's a recent book that just really slams the work of modern physics as far as Einstein's work, and shows how the physics community has just really put a wall around their work, and they held up Einstein's work as it's like a priesthood thing almost. Science Set Free is one that talks about, it's Rupert Sheldrake. He talks about how science is not like it seems to be. It's really a lot of opinion, a lot of interpretations, and very much of it is, it's just not as honest and trustworthy as it's thought to be. So that area has a lot of emotional stress, and this work puts some clear thinking into that. Image 60 switches to within physics itself. Now, before we were talking about people outside physics who are unhappy with the way physics is, but this one is about people within physics. Lee Smolin wrote this book, Trouble with Physics. So let me read that one. Smart students entering physics research with the required math skills. Now, these are people that are math wizard kids. They're stressed from being guided into rigid pathways of thought. Physics does not allow genuine freedom to innovate, to think outside the box using common sense and mechanical aptitude, personal intuition, combined with mathematics. They don't allow it. This would help. This really would help within physics, but I don't have any idea that will happen anytime soon. It won't come from me. This will have to rise up. Incidentally, too, I believe that this kind of thing, I believe that ideas that are important are like, they're like shoots that push up out of the ground. They're not just one place. So somewhere there's other people thinking about this same kind of thing. So eventually this kind of thinking that's in this story that we have to tell is going to be a commonplace story within, I'm thinking 30, 35, 40 years from now. It's bound to be a main story. So, this could be useful even within physics, although that one to me is way down on the list of likelihood as far as getting this story out to that group right now. They put a wall around themselves. And here's one of my favorites in this image 65. People are stressed. People will stress themselves over the inability to imagine a four-dimensional space, or they really want to imagine it. You try to imagine it, but it's impossible. It's impossible because of the mathematics of dimensionality that's used. And here we get a first hint of those earlier fundamentals and how they start coming in. The problem with trying to imagine that is because of being so consumed with thinking of parts and composition. You can never imagine a four-dimensional space if you think of it as a four-dimensional space of location where parts of some kind can be located. In this mathematics, that's not what it is. It's a four-dimensional space, but it's not that kind of space. And so the issue of visualizing it just doesn't come up. In normal contemporary story, the idea is that, somehow reality is a four-dimensional space like that, that is parts, that is location, where there are four-dimensional beings that, can come in and out of a three-dimensional space. And, that's really, and it's cute and fun maybe to think about, but it's really irrelevant. You can imagine a four-dimensional space when you relax that parts and composition and you think of participants and behavior, because the fourth dimension is a dimension inside. It's a behavioral dimension. So it's not a dimension of location. You can't go inside. You behave inside. It's not an objective thing. So there's countless books on four-dimensional dimensions where they try to give you different ways to imagine things in four dimension, in that sense, things as in the sense of parts. So there's a lot of stress about that, and so this could help with it. A fifth area shown in this image 70 is the one that I really went through in this work. Is that area is a kind of a disappointment in this dismissal of that flatland, spearland, four-dimensional idea. That series was really exciting and intuitive and got a lot of people excited about it. But there's a disappointment in that it's been dismissed based on this Kobe confirmation about light. And again, the idea of dimensionality is the problem. And so the official community has dismissed that idea of Spearland, popped that bubble. But in fact, this work continues it and doesn't have the problem of that Kobe data. This work is a web inside. Spearland is like an expanding balloon. And if you think of creatures living on the within the surface of a balloon, well, our world, our universe could be like that. It's impossible to imagine because it's a four-dimensional balloon. Well, you get the picture here. You don't have to deal with that four-dimensional idea. A relational web inside an expanding balloon fits really all of the equations of physics. Not all of them, but the relativity and energy and that kind of stuff. So people are disappointed. People know that Flatland, Spearland. There are movies on that. You could look it up. Each one has a little cartoon movie. But that stuff was all alive until 2006, and when the Kobe data dismissed it. So this work can bring that back to life. I've always thought of having a sequel called The Theater of Toy Physics, which tells about a web on the inside of Spearland and has fantasy characters that play out the reality of it. A sixth area is the one I thought about in the beginning quite a bit. Retired people stressed about the welfare of coming generations and stressed about not being able to make a contribution. They may have worked their whole life, had deep experience in doing work, got deep knowledge of something. But what did it gain? What was it for? It made some company money, or maybe it improved their performance. But they feel in retirement kind of lost as far as how to become an elder person who contributes to the future generations. And Come of Age was all about that, about so many old people, and with such a little opportunity to become elders who contribute. My idea was, excuse me again with the water, my idea was that people who have skills in that area, that STEM area again, would be able to understand this story. And if they are, if they're connected with church at all, or with spirituality at all, they can help then those people who are interested in spiritual aspects, who aren't interested in math and don't have the skills. These retired people could help. They could find a role, a purpose. Okay, here's one. There's a church with 800,000 people that's referred to as the Church of the Fourth Dimension. It was started by this David Yonggi Cho, who has since come into problems. I don't know whether it was theft from the church or involvement with some scandal. I don't know. But I read his description of how this came to him, and it really resonated with me. The basic idea of the spiritual fourth dimension is consistent with this story we've worked. His initial story was that he was inspired by seeing it in a dream, that there's an inner spiritual dimension that's the fourth dimension inside you. And from the book in advertisement in Amazon, that top blurb is there. So, you think, well, wow, this really gives a physical, this work gives a demonstration of how the physicality really supports that. The work, Einstein's relativity and everything, when you look at it with different mathematics, the inner dimension just works way better than that space-time. It makes sense and it fits everything. But I would be really reluctant if you read further in this fourth dimension work of Yogi. You really see some wild stuff, some healing stories that I just can't believe. So I've tended to think, no, not going to go after that. But there was something I saw just recently that's it's much milder and very interesting. We'll get that in the next image. In this image 85, I just happened on this the other day, so I copied down all the references. And I want to read to you a paragraph. This is written by a minister in California. He says, most of the time we are aware of living in only a three-dimensional world, but the fact that we are aware is an indication that there's much more to reality than just length, width, and depth. Our aware minds exist in a fourth dimension, one that can't be measured with a ruler. It's the dimension of spirit or soul. That expression, I just fully believe that, although I don't think of it as a fourth dimension of where beings are. I think of it as a dimension of behavior where things come up through us. And it comes up through every atom. If you look at the way this mathematics works, every atom has energy flowing through it, into and through it. The atom is expanding. This is the model that is self-standing. It's an expanding web. It's only related to physics by calibration. You calibrate it so that it expands at the speed of light. And then it has the characteristics of the same dynamics that we see in our own universe. So that that through that dimension, every atom is connected to the source. And in my own life, I've certainly had, I've done all my work almost with what I call surf dreaming, which is, just as you're going to sleep, to have things just bubble up. You don't think them, you don't find them by searching with your thoughts. They bubble up and you catch them like a fish and bring them in. That's my experience. And, the dreams that I had, that Graypaw dreams, where this story bubbled up to me, and Graypaw said, had me ask those 4 questions. What kind of place is this? What are we making of what science has said? What are we making of what spirit has said? It leads me right to this. So I think these guys had the right idea. And this is a legitimate church, seems to be, but the thing that I am put off by it is that I've seen a couple of others like these, but, they still persist with the Santa Claus, Easter Bunny story, which I just, what I mean by that. It's the next one that the shoe has never dropped on. The miraculous stories that come from 2,000 years ago that have been that were written 400 years after they happened, and you had these councils that decided what was true and all that. So they still subscribe to that. So anyway, that's just an interesting point, and you can hear in my voice the reluctance to engage in that, and yet that is almost exactly where I want this to go. So it's paradoxical to me. Here's the final image in this series, image 90. It brings us back to mother sense and father science. And the thing is that there's a mythical and poetic story using these characters that gets to the heart of all of those stresses. And it's really asking these questions, these three questions, but with a different twist for every one of those stresses. In the history, what has happened in history, and specifically what has happened, in the last. If you align with the ancients, and you start with Pythagoras and then Christ, and you go forward, and you have the two avenues, mother sense and father science. They weren't separated, and if you look at the scientists, they were ingrained with the Christians for centuries, and it was only really in the past century or more, century and a half, that there came to be this split between them. So that history, what happened there? That's the story of this. And then present, we bring it to now. What's the problem? What problems does that cause? That gets to those stresses. And then there's the future. What can be done about it? And that gets to the new mathematics. A problem is that the roots of father science are they're missing something. There's something undeveloped there, and new branches can't grow unless the new roots are cultivated. So once you cultivate those roots, and that gets back to the very beginning, those parts and participants, the in here, out there, and the joining idea. You clean up the roots and get another taproot in there that will support different story. So this work is the new taproots and the different story, new mathematics. And so that's what can be done. You can retell existing or tell about existing experimental data using different mathematics. In doing so, you get a different story, and these stresses are relieved to a large extent. Not completely. I don't want to draw too much of a black and white here, but to a great extent, these stresses can be relieved. So starting with a mythical and poetic story using mother sense and father science, you can tell the basics of what happened and what is the problem, without getting into without getting into the technical detail. Okay, I understand that this may have been overwhelming. I hope I didn't, I hope it wasn't overwhelming.